Okay, so let's discuss how we go about building the roof of the neighbour to the right. We've talked in class that we have Google Maps and Google Satellite to assist us to understand what the context of our project is in terms of how big are the neighbours to the right and to the left of our building. How big is our site in relation to the neighbours on the left and the right, and perhaps at the back? Where is our existing building currently located, if there is an existing building? And where are the neighbouring buildings located in relation to their properties, and so forth? Okay, so what we've been able to retrieve is, of course, an aerial screenshot, or a screenshot of the aerial view of our site, okay, including the information about the adjacent properties. So if you remember how we brought in that image, we went File, External Content, Place External Drawing, and then we, once selecting this, had to choose where that external drawing, or in this case the JPEG of our Google Maps aerial view, and then we brought it into our project and assigned it to a particular layer. Okay, in this case the layer is, I've just pressed Ctrl L to bring up this layer settings window. The layer that we assigned it to was Site Aerial Photo. At the moment, I have the Site Aerial Photo layer hidden, which is indicated by the eyepiece being closed, which means that anything that is allocated to this layer is not visible in our working grid. Okay. The reason that I hid it was just to make my drafting on the grid easier, because I didn't want this photo to get in the way of what I needed to be drafting. But now we really want to see this photo so that I can understand what the roof shape is doing on the adjacent property. So to do that, I've pressed Ctrl L to bring up this layer box, layer settings window box. And I'm going to press the eyepiece to indicate to ArchiCAD that I now want to see anything that is assigned to this layer. Okay, so I press OK, and the aerial photo comes back. All right, the aerial photo is now visible on this layer. If I were to select this image, you can see from the information box along the top that it is assigned to the site aerial photo. Okay. When anything is selected on the grid, such as this image, which is selected currently because it's in green, you can see that it's selected because it's highlighted in green, you can move those highlighted or selected elements between layers. Okay, this you can do by just clicking on this button in the information box. However, to actually hide layers, or to unhide layers, or to lock layers, or to unlock layers, you must press Ctrl L to bring up this window, and to hide and unhide, and to lock and unlock, and also to create new layers or to delete layers. Okay, so just remember, the only thing that you can do at this sort of area of the ArchiCAD work environment is just to assign things between layers. Okay. All right, so we're not wanting to assign it to another layer because that's the layer that we want it to be on. Okay, let's have a look at this roof shape. So the roof is a multi-plane roof, and we've got a ridge line here and a ridge line here. So it looks like these ridge lines are meeting at the same RL level, or the same relative level above project zero. Okay. This one we can't be sure, but it might seem that this ridge line is lower because the ridge line does not go all the way, does not reach all the way to this ridge line. It's only reaching to here, which would indicate that it's further down and is hitting the this plane, roof plane, at this point. Okay, we'll be able to tell a bit more clearly where this particular roof lies in relation to this multi-plane roof by a photo of this side elevation. Okay, so the left side elevation of this building. Okay, but in the first instance, what we'd like to do is create this roof as a multi-plane roof, create this roof as two single plane roofs mirrored about this ridge line. Okay, so when considering this roof, what we need to do is come over to our toolbox and double click the roof element in our toolbox. Okay, when this comes up, what we've got now is all the information that is necessary to put in our roof default settings before we actually draw the roof. Okay, so in the first instance, we've got the geometry and positioning, which is asking us, well, what is the RL of the roof to the bottom of where the roof plane may start in relation to project 0? Okay, generally we only fill out this box, and this box up here will automatically adjust to be in relation to the current story. Okay, so what I mean by that is if I press 100,000 here, then this box automatically changes in relation to the current story. For our particular project, the current story RL and the project 0 RL will be the same because we've started the project at a 0 story setting base. Okay, I'll just explain what that means, just take the opportunity now and say that for the story settings, we've got only an RL level starting at 0. However, if we've got story settings that begin from a RL level or an elevation level that is not 0, then say for example it is 100,000 is the start of the first story, then the RL to project 0 will be different to the RL to the current story when looking in the roof tool. Okay, now that may not be quite clear at the moment because we haven't yet discussed setting the story settings using, of course, the design story settings function. It will become clearer when we do go through that at the time when we're about to build our project itself. And I'll revisit this concept when we come to build the building for our project. Okay, now for the roof, we're going to leave this roof setting as it is, okay, because at this stage we don't know what the RL level to project 0 is of this roof. The reason we don't know is, of course, because we don't have a survey, and the survey would generally tell us information about the neighbour, not necessarily the entire neighbour. The survey would not necessarily tell us information about the entire building on the adjacent property, but if the surveyor is any good, he would at least give us the RLs of the information that relate to the roof and relate to the windows that are closest to our property. Okay, the reason for this is because it's important for us to know the RL of anything that is near our site for the RL of the ridge levels of the roof, the RL for the sill and the heads of the windows, so that we can build those in ArchiCAD to understand if our building is casting a shadow onto the adjacent buildings. Say it may block a lot of sunlight to existing windows of our building, then we begin to have a reason to be concerned about the design that we're going to submit to council, because it then may be rejected by council because it may not have more than, say, 2 hours of sunlight to build to this building, where the window is a window to, say, a living area. Okay. It's also important to have the ridge levels of this adjacent building, because then we can also understand the bulk of the building itself, and also whether there is any shadow that's going to be existing that is cast on our building. Okay. Now, because we don't have a survey, we're going to leave the RL to project 0 of the roof line as it's defaulting, and then we'll attend to it when we come to look at the photos of the elevation of our building. Okay, so remember when I before you went to site, I suggested that as much as possible you take photos of the sides of your buildings face on, okay, or parallel to, so that you don't get any sort of perspective distortions, or you get as little as possible perspective distortions, so that you can really understand what is the sizings of those buildings. Okay, so we're going to leave the RL to project 0 as it is. We're going to put the slope of the planes of the roof at a 45-degree angle. Okay, and I'll explain why I've assumed it to be a 45-degree angle when we look at the side elevation photo. Okay, what you'll notice from the side elevation photo is that it very much looks like a 45-degree roof, particularly so because at the apex of the roof, where the two roof planes of one of our particular photos that we will be looking at shortly, where they meet at the apex, it looks like a 90-degree joint, okay, which would then indicate that at the start or at the base of the roof plane, that would be a 45-degree incline given our Pythagoras theorem. Okay, so if that takes you back to your high school mathematics. So we're going to leave that at 45 degrees. Now, the offset in this case is going to be 0. Generally, what ArchiCAD does for you, and it's really great, is that in version 15 now, it will nominate an offset for you, so that when you're drawing the roof on top of an existing wall, you can, at this stage, tell ArchiCAD what the eave overhang is. Okay, so if the eave overhang is 450 mils, then you can type in here 450. Whereas previously in ArchiCAD version 13, that was not the case. You couldn't specify for, say, a single plane roof, the offset in this window. What you had to do was build the roof on top of the existing wall, with no eave overhang, and then in plan use the offset tool, which we've seen a number of times already. Use the offset tool to offset by 450. Okay, so if you recall, the offset tool is when you click on either a slab or a roof or a mesh. If you click on the edge and not at the dot, when you click, it brings up this little palette, and this is the offset edge, okay, icon. We've seen this a number of times now in our classes, but just to remind you that this pet palette is the pet palette that comes up when you click on the edge of either a roof, a slab, or a mesh. And just while I'm here, I'll just show you the different pet palettes so that comes up when you click on a node. Okay, so notice how this pet palette, and we'll just cancel that pet palette is different to this pet palette, because of course your functions in ArchiCAD is different if you are clicking on an edge or clicking on a node, okay, or a black dot, a node, which is a black dot. Okay, all right, so just going back to the roof toolbox, we've now got we've discussed the RL to project 0, the angle of the incline of the roof plane. The offset's going to be 0. Okay. Now and the elevation is going to be 0 as well, because we don't know what the elevation is at this stage. Okay, now the cut fill, we're going to make that airspace. And if you notice what happens when I click on here, all the different types of hatchings will become available to us. Okay, just escape out just so that you can see that before, on sheet metal on 100 rafters, that is what's called a composite structure. Okay, so sheet metal on 100 rafters is here. Now, this composite structure is, as its name suggests, a structure that has more than one skin. Okay, so there's two skins that are on this particular composite structure are, of course, one skin of sheet metal and one skin of 100 width timber rafters. Okay, so what it's doing is attempting to hatch two different elements or two different building components in one go. All right, but in our case, we don't need that sort of detail. We only really need something that is just a simple 150 mil thick solid fill, for example. So what we're going to do is click on airspace. And I want just to draw your attention to the fact that at the moment, whilst it is selected as sheet metal on 100 rafters, this box is grayed out. And the reason it's grayed out is because sheet metal on 100 rafters must be set at 150 mils in width. Okay, there is no other sort of because it's 150 in width, it's set. Okay, and for example, this 100 rafters on tiled roof is set at 170, and this is the reason why it's not possible to edit this field and why it's grayed out. But if you notice, if I then change it to an airspace, which is what we're after, something simple, then automatically you can get access to change this. Okay, because it's not a composite structure airspace. Airspace could be any thickness, and ArchiCAD doesn't know what that is. Whereas previously ArchiCAD has been told that sheet metal on 100 rafters must be set at 150 thick. Okay, so what we're going to do is click on airspace, which we've just done, and change this to 150. Okay, 150 is a judgment that I've made based on the photos that the roof is, say, 150 thick. Okay, now if we keep going, I'm going to just show you in this section, we've got the model color. Okay, the model color is currently sitting as generic fascia. Now, if you wanted to change the model color to something else, then by all means, you're welcome to do that. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at the default, which is generic fascia. And then the listing and labeling and the tags and categories, you can just leave for the time being. But the other important thing is to, at this stage, assign it to the correct, or assign what we are about to draw to the correct layer. Okay, in this case, site context is the correct layer. Okay, because this is the two buildings or the two neighbors to either side of our project form part of our site context. The reason it's important to assign it to a layer is that in future tutorials, what we will want to do is to hide the information about the neighbors so that we can concentrate on focusing on our site existing, okay, which will be our site and our project until we get to a stage where we allocate our building to their specific layers. But being able to switch off the site context, that is to switch off both neighbors after we've built them, is very useful, because after those neighbors are built, we really don't need to think about them again until much later in the semester. Okay, so we're going to leave it at site context, and then I'm going to press OK. Now, with OK, what we need to do is consider how we're going to draw this. And as I was talking before earlier, we've put in all the information in our roof default settings, but the information box, it has some information about the roof default settings in here, which we can change. But what the information box has that the roof default settings in the toolbox does not is how you go about drawing it. Okay, so for example, when we're looking at a roof, we can only in the information box nominate that the roof is either going to be, for example, a single roof or a polyline roof or a single polyline wall, a single wall, a polyline wall, or a square wall, or a wall that is square but on an incline. Okay, so notice that the information box is the geometry mode drawing box, or how we go about drawing in plan. The toolbox is the parameters that mostly relate to the vertical information that ArchiCAD needs to know in order to draw this correctly or draft it correctly in both 2D and also now 3D. So if you recall for our roof, all this information here is mostly to do with how you set this project up set up the toolbox element in 3D. Okay, so as in RL, and what's it going to look like in the 3D model, what's it going to look like when it's cut, and so forth, okay, in the cut fill. Now, let's draw this roof. So I'm cognizant that this video is getting very long, so what I'll do is I'll stop the video now, and then in the next video, we will draw the roof shape.